The screen of my phone lit up, casting a harsh blue glow in the quiet dark of Sam's bedroom. For a second, I just stared at the name. Mom. A text message glowed beneath it. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, steady rhythm, suddenly kicked into a frantic gallop against my ribs. My hand was shaking as I swiped the screen open. CPS just left. They know everything. What did you tell them, Leo? The words seemed to burn on the screen. I could feel the blood drain from my face, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Everything. What was everything? Was it the basement? The skipped meals? The feeling of being a ghost in my own house? I read the message again. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. A blade sharpened and aimed right at me. Then the screen changed. The word Mom was now at the top, with the option to accept or decline her call. The phone began to vibrate against the nightstand, a furious, insistent buzzing that felt like it was drilling into my skull. My thumb hovered over the green icon. I could imagine her voice, not the sweet, patient one she used for strangers and friends, but the other one. The one that was sharp and brittle with disappointment, the one reserved for me. I pressed the red icon instead. The buzzing stopped. The silence that rushed back in was a relief so profound it felt like a sin. I stared at the dark screen, at my own faint reflection. A 16-year-old boy with shadows under his eyes. I turned the phone over, face down, and pushed it away. The quiet of Sam's guest room was a luxury I hadn't realized I'd forgotten. It was clean, it smelled like fresh laundry, and the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. It was a sanctuary. But it wasn't mine. None of this was what I wanted. I never wanted to cause trouble. I just wanted a room. My own room. It all started, I guess, when my room stopped being my room. A year ago, it was still my space. My sanctuary. It wasn't a large room, just a simple square on the second floor of our house in Maple Creek, Ohio. But it was mine. I had a desk by the window where the afternoon sun would slant across my drawing pad. The walls were a geography of my mind, covered in charcoal sketches of fantasy landscapes and characters from books I loved. My books were stacked in precarious towers on the floor because the single bookshelf was overflowing. It smelled of graphite, paper, and the faint, clean scent of the pine tree just outside my window. It was the one place in the world where I felt like I could breathe, where I could just be Leo. Our family has always been helpful. That's the word my parents, Mark and Sarah, use. Helpful. To outsiders, they're practically saints. The first people to call when someone's in a jam. The family that opens their door to anyone in need. And in a small town like Maple Creek, there was always someone in need. It started small. My cousin, Kyle, needed a place to stay for a weekend while his parents were out of town. The guest room was already occupied by one of my mom's college friends who was finding herself. So, my parents came to me. "Leo, honey," my mom said, her hand on my arm, her smile gentle and persuasive. "You'll be a pal and let Kyle have your room for a couple of nights, won't you? You're the oldest. You understand." I didn't really understand, but I nodded. What else could I do? I was 14. So I slept on the living room sofa. It was lumpy, and the light from the street lamp outside the big window kept me awake, but it was just for a weekend. I could handle a weekend. But then a weekend turned into a week-long stay for a different relative. Then it was summer, and the house swelled with visitors. The guest room was a permanent fixture for strangers, and my room became the official overflow unit. I learned to keep a duffel bag packed with the essentials, a change of clothes, my toothbrush, my phone charger. My drawings got smudged. My books got knocked over. A model spaceship I had spent a month building was found in pieces, swept into a corner. I stopped leaving my things out. The walls started to look bare as I took down my sketches to protect them. The room began to feel less and less like mine. My siblings Caleb, who's 13, Mia, 12, and Lily, 9 were mostly unaffected. They had their own rooms. No one ever asked Mia or Lily to give up their space. Their rooms were pink and purple sanctuaries of dolls and posters of pop stars. Occasionally, Caleb would have a cousin his age stay over, and they'd share his double bed, turning it into a giggling, whispering fort. It was framed as fun. An adventure. Mine was framed as a duty. It's just different, Leo, my dad explained one evening when I tried to protest. We were standing in the hallway, and I could hear the laughter of 6 extra people in our living room. You have your own room. The girls share. Caleb's room is too small for an extra bed. You're the one with the space to give. But it's my space, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I don't have anywhere to go. My dad clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but felt dismissive. You can take the couch. It builds character. Look, son, being generous, helping people out, that's what good people do. It's the right thing to do. You don't want to be selfish, do you? Selfish. That was the word. The ultimate crime in our household. If you weren't giving, you were taking. If you weren't sacrificing, you were selfish. And so, I learned to be quiet. I learned to sleep on the sofa, listening to the house breathe and groan with the weight of too many people. The breaking point, the moment I gave up on the living room, came during Christmas. The house was bursting. We had my mom's sister, her husband, and their 4 kids. We had 2 of my dad's work colleagues who couldn't fly home for the holidays. Every sofa, every armchair, was a bed. There was no floor space that wasn't a minefield of luggage and sleeping bags. I found myself standing in the middle of it all at 2 in the morning, needing to use the bathroom and having to step over a snoring, unfamiliar man who smelled like stale beer. I felt like an intruder in my own home. That's when I discovered the basement. It wasn't finished. The walls were concrete block, and the floor was cold, painted cement. It smelled of damp earth and laundry detergent. The furnace and water heater sat in one corner, rumbling to life at random intervals. Spiders had been the primary residence for years. But it was empty. And it was quiet. The next day, I took my sleeping bag, a pillow, and a small lamp downstairs. I found an old, dusty rug in a storage closet and laid it out on the concrete. I ran an extension cord from the laundry room outlet. I set up my camp in the farthest, driest corner I could find. It was cold. The single, small window high on the wall was caked with dirt and let in almost no light. But no one would bother me down here. No one even came down here unless they were doing laundry. My parents noticed, of course. What are you doing in the basement, Leo? My mother asked, a frown creasing her forehead. There's no room upstairs, I said simply. She looked like she wanted to argue, to tell me to find a spot on the floor somewhere, but then another guest called her name from the kitchen, and her attention snapped away. Well, just try to stay warm, she said over her shoulder as she hurried off. And that was that. The basement became my home. My sketches and books stayed packed away in boxes, stacked against a damp wall. I stopped thinking of the room upstairs as mine. It was just the guest room annex. I became a creature of the downstairs, emerging for school or for meals, which were their own special kind of hell. With so many mouths to feed on a budget that was clearly strained, meals became a chaotic buffet. And there was an unspoken rule. The guests ate first. My parents would serve them, bustling around, making sure everyone had enough, their faces beaming with pride at their own generosity. Then, after all the friends and relatives and friends of friends were satisfied, our family would eat whatever was left. More often than not, it wasn't much. I learned to eat fast, to not complain when the main dish was gone and all that remained were some picked-over side salads or a few dinner rolls. I was always hungry. A dull, constant ache in my stomach became my new normal. Caleb would complain sometimes, and my dad would tell him to be grateful we had food at all. I just stopped expecting to feel full. I lived like that for months. A subterranean boy in a house full of strangers. I went to school, did my homework on a folding table next to a humming freezer, and tried to disappear. I felt myself fading, becoming as gray and dusty as the concrete walls around me. My own parents barely seemed to see me. I was just part of the plumbing, a fixture of the house that worked silently in the background. I was the oldest. It was my duty. I wasn't selfish. But I was starving, and I was so tired of the cold. The new year, 2025, didn't bring any resolutions for change in our house. It just brought more people. By then, I had become so accustomed to my subterranean life that the idea of sleeping in an actual bed felt foreign. There were 3 separate nights in January when my old room was actually empty. I could have moved back upstairs. I could have reclaimed my space. I didn't even try. The effort of moving my things back up, only to be told to move them out again a few days later, felt like a mountain I was too tired to climb. It was easier to stay in my dusty corner, in the predictable cold. It was a miserable consistency, but it was mine. Then my dad's brother, Robert, lost his job. He, his wife, and their 3 kids were evicted from their apartment. Without a moment's hesitation, my dad told them to come stay with us. Essentially, he said, they're just living here for a while. There was no end date. No plan. Just 5 more bodies crammed into our already strained house. They took my old room and the official guest room. The house, which had been full, was now overflowing. To make matters worse, my dad's parents decided it was the perfect summer to come for an extended visit. They wanted to be there for Robert in his time of need, and to spend quality time with the grandkids. So my grandparents moved into the den, the one small, quiet room on the first floor that had, until then, remained unoccupied. The house became a constant, churning sea of humanity. A never-ending game of human Tetris where I was the piece that never fit. The noise was a physical presence, a low, constant roar of televisions, arguments, children shrieking, and overlapping conversations. The line for the bathroom in the morning was a gauntlet of bleary-eyed relatives I barely knew. Privacy was a forgotten concept. My hunger became sharper, more desperate. With so many extra people, my dad's paychecks were stretched to their breaking point. My mom would cook huge, starchy meals, casseroles, pasta, giant pots of chili. But it was never enough. I watched, my stomach clenching, as the food disappeared from the platters before they even got near me. I'd arrive in the kitchen to find the sad, oily remnants of a salad and maybe a single, lonely bread roll. I started taking apples from the school cafeteria, stuffing them in my bag to eat later in the cold silence of the basement. I was losing weight. My jeans were loose, and there was a constant, light-headed fuzziness in my brain. My only escape was Sam's house. Sam had been my best friend since we were kids. His house was on the next street over, but it felt like a different universe. It was quiet. It was organized. It smelled like cinnamon and whatever his mom, Mrs. Davis, was baking. There were only 4 people who lived there, Sam, his parents, and his older sister. They ate dinner together every night at a table where everyone had a seat. I started spending more and more time there after school. Mrs. Davis never pried, but she saw things. I knew she did. "Leo, you look exhausted," she'd say, handing me a glass of milk and a plate of warm cookies. "Is everything all right at home?" "Yeah, just busy," I'd mumble, not meeting her eyes. I was too ashamed to tell her the truth. "You're getting so thin," she'd press gently. "Are you eating properly? Let me make you a sandwich." I never refused. The food at Sam's house was a miracle. Eating until I was full felt like the most incredible luxury. I'd sit at their clean kitchen counter, doing my homework in the peaceful quiet, and I would feel a deep, aching sadness. This was normal. This was what a home was supposed to feel like. The final straw came in early May. The dominoes, which had been wobbling for months, finally collapsed in a catastrophic heap. First, one of my mom's old high school friends, Brenda, showed up on our doorstep in tears. Her husband had left her, and she and her 2 kids had nowhere to go. My mom, her face a mask of tragic sympathy, welcomed them in. They took over the main living room, setting up a fortress of air mattresses and suitcases. I thought that was it. I thought we had finally reached maximum capacity. I was wrong. A week later, my dad got a call. It was from Jessica. Jessica was his ex-wife's daughter from a previous marriage. He had been her stepfather for a few years over 2 decades ago. They hadn't seen each other in years, but they were friends on Facebook. Her family's apartment building had a major plumbing disaster, and they needed a place to crash for a few weeks. My dad, ever the hero, told her of course they could stay. I came home from Sam's that evening and walked down the stairs to the basement. I stopped on the last step, my hand freezing on the wooden railing. My corner, my dusty little sanctuary, was gone. Jessica's husband was in the middle of inflating a large queen-sized air mattress right where my sleeping bag had been. Their luggage was piled up against the wall where I kept my box of art supplies. He looked up and saw me. "Hey, you must be one of the kids. Your dad said we could set up down here. Hope that's cool." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. There were no words. It was like watching someone erase the last sentence of a book you were in. I was no longer a character. I didn't even have a footnote. I turned around without a word and walked back up the stairs. I passed my mom in the hallway. She was carrying a stack of clean towels. "Oh, Leo, there you are," she said, distracted. "Can you believe it? Poor Jessica. It's a good thing we have the space." She didn't even notice the look on my face. She didn't see that her son had just been rendered homeless inside his own home. I walked into the kitchen, a strange, cold calm settling over me. I opened my school backpack and put my last apple inside, along with my phone charger and the book I was reading. I walked to the front door, slipping on my sneakers. The chaotic noise of the house was a wall of sound behind me. It didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a crowded, poorly managed shelter where I didn't have a bed. I walked out the front door, pulling it quietly shut behind me. I didn't look back. The evening air was cool on my face. I walked the familiar path to Sam's house, my backpack feeling impossibly light. Sam's parents opened the door. Mrs. Davis took one look at my face and her own expression softened with concern. "Leo? What is it? Can I stay here tonight?" I asked, my voice cracking. "There's no room for me at my house." That night, I slept on the sofa in their family room. It was comfortable. It was quiet. And when I woke up the next morning, the thought of going back to that house filled me with a primal dread. So I stayed another night. And then another. On the 3rd evening, Mrs. Davis sat me down at her kitchen table. She placed a bowl of steaming soup in front of me. Mr. Davis sat across from me, his expression serious and kind. "Leo," she began, her voice gentle. "You need to tell us what's really going on." And for the first time, I did. I told them everything. I told them about my room becoming a revolving door for guests. I told them about moving to the basement. I told them about the meals, about always being hungry. I told them about Jessica and her family taking my last little corner of the house. The words tumbled out of me, a quiet, miserable flood of neglect and invisibility. They listened without interrupting. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the clean, warm kitchen. Mrs. Davis had tears in her eyes. Mr. Davis stared at the table, his jaw tight. He looked at his wife, a silent, grim conversation passing between them. I didn't know it then, sitting in the safety of their kitchen, but my quiet confession had just lit a fuse. The life I had known, the chaotic, unbearable normal, was about to explode. The next few days at the Davises' house were a strange, peaceful limbo. I went to school, came back to their quiet home, did my homework, and ate 3 full meals a day. It felt like I was a foreign exchange student visiting a country called normal. My parents texted a few times. "Where are you?" The first one read. I replied, "At Sam's." The response was just, "Okay. Be good." They didn't ask when I was coming home. I think, in the chaos of their overflowing house, my absence was barely a blip. It might have even been a relief, one less body to navigate around, one less mouth to worry about feeding from the scraps. I didn't know what Mr. and Mrs. Davis were planning. I just knew that they were looking at me with a new kind of intensity, a mixture of pity and a fierce, protective anger that I had never seen on my own parents' faces. I tried not to think about what would happen next. I just soaked in the quiet, hoarding the feeling of safety like it was a finite resource. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I was called out of my second-period history class. The request came over the intercom, my name echoing through the classroom, making my face flush with heat. I walked to the principal's office, my mind racing. Had I done something wrong? Was I in trouble? The school secretary, a woman with impossibly tall, gray hair, gave me a small, tight smile. "Leo, there's someone here to see you. You can use the guidance counselor's office." She led me to a small, windowless room with 2 soft chairs and a ficus tree that looked like it was dying of sadness. A woman was waiting for me. She was in her 40s, with neat, dark hair pulled back in a clip and a calm, serious face. She wore a simple blue blazer and held a notepad. "Leo," she said, her voice even and professional. "My name is Mrs. Albright. I'm with the Department of Child and Family Services. Do you know what that is?" My heart plummeted into my shoes. CPS. Child Protective Services. The words were a terrifying whisper in my mind. These were the people who took kids away. I suddenly felt cold, despite the stuffy air in the little room. "I think so," I mumbled, my hands clammy. "Your friend's parents, the Davises, contacted us," she explained, her eyes watching me carefully. "They're concerned about you, Leo. About your living situation at home. I'm here just to talk. To understand what's going on. You are not in any trouble. Can we just talk?" I sank into the other chair, my legs feeling weak. I nodded, unable to speak. I felt a surge of panic. Were they going to take me away? Was I going to get my parents in trouble? A wave of guilt washed over me, so powerful it almost made me sick. They were good people. They helped everyone. They just didn't have room for me. Mrs. Albright seemed to sense my fear. "Take a deep breath," she said gently. "I just want to hear your side of the story. Can you tell me what it's like at your house right now?" I looked at her patient, neutral expression. And I thought about the basement. I thought about the cold floor, the smell of damp concrete. I thought about the gnawing hunger in my stomach day after day. I thought about Jessica's husband inflating an air mattress in my last refuge. And I thought about my parents' distracted smiles as they catered to an endless stream of strangers while I slowly disappeared. Something inside me broke. The wall of shame and guilt I had built around myself crumbled. So I talked. I started at the beginning, with my room, my sanctuary of drawings and books. I told her how it became the overflow room. I told her about the lumpy sofa and the sleepless nights. I told her about my decision to move into the basement, and how it went from a temporary solution to a permanent reality. "Can you describe the basement for me?" she asked, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. "It's unfinished," I said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "It's cold. The floor is cement. There are spiders. The furnace is loud. It's where we do laundry. I swallowed hard. It's better than the living room floor, though. It's quieter. I told her about the meals. The guests always eat first, I explained, my voice flat. My parents make sure they have plenty. By the time it's our turn, my siblings and me, there usually isn't much left. The main stuff is gone. Are you hungry, Leo? She asked, her gaze direct. I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Most of the time. I pulled out my phone. I didn't know why I had taken them, but I had. A few pictures from a couple of weeks ago, when my uncle's family was there. A photo of the living room, a chaotic mess of sleeping bags, luggage, and discarded clothes, looking more like a refugee camp than a family room. A photo of the kitchen counter after dinner, showing empty platters and a few sad-looking lettuce leaves. A photo of my corner in the basement, my sleeping bag and pillow laid out on the dirty rug next to the water heater. I handed her the phone. She scrolled through the pictures, her expression unreadable. She spent a long time looking at the photo of my sleeping arrangements. "You've been sleeping here full-time?" she asked, her voice soft. "Until last week," I corrected her. "When my dad's his ex-stepdaughter and her family came to stay. They're in the basement now. That's why I went to Sam's. There wasn't anywhere else to go." She handed my phone back to me. "Leo," she said, and for the first time, her professional calm seemed to crack, revealing a flicker of something else, empathy, maybe. "You did the right thing by telling me this. I want you to know that. My job is to make sure kids are safe. And that includes you." She explained what would happen next. She would have to visit my house. She would have to talk to my parents. She assured me, again and again, that I would not be in trouble, and that her goal wasn't to punish anyone, but to make sure the situation was safe and healthy for me and my siblings. "Do my parents know that I'm the one who told you all this?" I asked, the fear returning. "My conversation with you is confidential," she said. "But they might guess. The details you've given me are very specific. Are you afraid of how they'll react?" I thought of my mother's smile, which could turn to ice in a second. I thought of my father's booming voice when he talked about the importance of family loyalty. "Yes," I said honestly. "Okay," she said, making a final note. "We'll deal with that. For now, is it okay for you to continue staying with the Devises?" "Yes," I said, relief flooding through me. "Please." When I left the office, I felt strangely hollowed out. I had spoken the truth, a truth I had kept locked inside me for over a year. And now it was out in the world, a living thing that was going to walk right up to my front door and knock. I didn't know if I had just saved myself or if I had just destroyed my family. Maybe I had done both at the same time. The call came 2 days later. I was at Sam's house, trying to focus on my algebra homework, but the words from my meeting with Mrs. Albright kept replaying in my mind. Sam's mom had made sure I stayed home from school the day after the interview, saying I looked like I needed a day to rest. She didn't push or ask questions, she just made me pancakes and let me be quiet, an act of kindness so simple and profound it almost made me cry. My phone buzzed on the table. It was my dad. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. I had been dreading this. I let it ring, the sound unnaturally loud in the peaceful house. Then a text came through. "You need to come home. Now. We need to talk." There was no escaping it. Mrs. Davis saw the look on my face. "Is it your father?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Do you want me or Bill to go with you?" "No," I said, though my entire being screamed yes. "I have to do this myself." The walk home felt like a march to my own execution. Every step was heavy. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows that looked like grasping fingers. From the outside, my house looked the same. A normal suburban house on a normal street. But as I got closer, I could feel the tension radiating from it, a low hum of anger that was almost tangible. I opened the front door and stepped inside. The change was immediate and shocking. The house was quiet. Eerily quiet. The chaotic noise I was used to was gone. The living room was empty of air mattresses. The pile of luggage by the door had vanished. For a second, I wondered if I'd walked into the wrong house. Then I saw them. My parents were sitting at the dining room table, stiff and silent. My dad's face was a thundercloud, his jaw set, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. My mom was staring at her own hands, her expression a mixture of fury and deep, painful humiliation. "Sit down, Leo," my dad said. His voice wasn't loud. It was worse. It was a low, controlled rumble that promised an explosion. I sat down opposite them. The polished wood of the table felt like a vast, empty battlefield between us. "A woman from Child and Family Services came here today," my mom said, her voice trembling with rage. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were like chips of ice. "Mrs. Albright. She knew things, Leo. Things that only someone who lives in this house could know." I didn't say anything. I just met her gaze. "She knew about you sleeping in the basement," my dad continued, his voice tight. "She knew about the meals. She had seen pictures. Pictures from your phone, I imagine. She told us that the living conditions in this house are unacceptable. That we are failing to provide a safe and stable environment for our own children." He spat the words out like they were poison. "She said we have too many people here. That we have to ask our family, our guests, to leave." I could hear the disbelief and outrage in his voice. To him, asking family to leave was the ultimate sin, a betrayal far greater than letting his own son sleep on a concrete floor. "They're all gone," my mom whispered, a tear of pure anger tracing a path down her cheek. "Brenda. Jessica and her family. We had to tell them to leave. Today. Can you imagine the shame, Leo? The embarrassment? Having to tell people who needed our help that we were throwing them out because the government said so." "Why?" my dad's voice suddenly boomed, and I flinched. "Why would you do this to us? To this family? We gave you everything. We work ourselves to the bone to give you a home, food, a good life. And you repay us by calling the authorities? By humiliating us in front of the entire world?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "We gave you everything." The words ignited a spark in the cold, fearful pit of my stomach. A spark of anger. "Everything?" I heard myself say, my own voice shaky but clear. "You gave me everything. When was the last time I slept in my own bed? When was the last time I had a full meal in this house? You didn't give me a home. You gave me a space in the basement until you found someone else to give it to." My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as if I had physically struck her. My dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You ungrateful little," he started, his face turning a dark red. "No," I said, standing up too, fueled by a year of silent frustration. "I'm not ungrateful. I'm honest. I told her the truth. You want to know why I did it? Because I was hungry. Because I was cold. Because I felt like a ghost in my own house while you two were busy playing saints to every stranger who knocked on your door." The words poured out of me, hot and messy. "You care more about what the neighbors think than what your own son feels. You care more about Brenda and Jessica and Uncle Robert than you do about me, or Caleb, or Mia, or Lily. You let me disappear so you could feel good about yourselves. So you could be the helpful ones." I was breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. The truth, now that it was out, was both terrifying and liberating. "I didn't call them," I said, my voice dropping slightly. "The Devises did. But when Mrs. Albright asked me what was going on, I didn't lie. I'm done lying for you. I'm done pretending this is okay. My dad just stared at me, his rage momentarily replaced by a stunned silence. My mom was openly crying now, silent, bitter tears of wounded pride. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears for their shattered image. You have broken this family, Leo, my dad said finally, his voice heavy with condemnation. I hope you're proud of yourself. He turned and walked out of the room. My mom wouldn't look at me. The silence she left behind was more damning than any shout. I stood there in the quiet, empty house, the ghost who had finally learned how to scream. The silence was what I thought I wanted, but it was a cold, lonely victory. My siblings were still at a neighbor's house, shielded from the confrontation. I was alone with the wreckage I had created. I turned and walked back out the front door, leaving it open behind me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there. The family I had known was broken, and I was the one holding the hammer. The weeks that followed were a cold war fought in the silent hallways of my own home. I was technically living there again, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a demilitarized zone. The house was emptier than it had been in years. Uncle Robert and his family had found a small, subsidized apartment on the other side of town, their departure a tense, hurried affair full of sidelong, accusing glances in my direction. My grandparents were still there, but even they treated me with a new, frosty distance, as if I were a stranger who had brought a plague upon the house. My room was mine again. I moved my things back in from their boxes in the basement, but the space felt alien. The walls were still bare. I had no desire to put my drawings back up. It didn't feel safe. It felt temporary, a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. Most nights, I'd lie in my own bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house a constant reminder of the chasm that had opened between me and my parents. They spoke to me only when necessary, their words clipped and functional. Dinner's ready. Take out the trash. There was no warmth, no affection. I was a pariah, the family traitor. My dad's presence was a heavy, disapproving weight in every room. My mom's hurt had hardened into a brittle resentment. She would look at me, and I could see the question in her eyes, how could you? My siblings were caught in the crossfire. Caleb, at 13, was old enough to understand parts of it, and he sided with our parents. You got Uncle Robert kicked out, he accused me one afternoon, blocking the hallway. Everyone's mad. You're so selfish. The word hit me like a slap, the old weapon still sharp. Mia and Lily were just confused. They knew the house was quiet and tense, that Mom cried sometimes in her room, and that Leo was the cause. They'd look at me with wide, uncertain eyes, and I'd see myself reflecting their confusion. I didn't know how to explain it to them. As part of the CPS mandate, my parents were required to attend weekly parenting classes. They hated it. They complained about it constantly, not to me, but to each other, in loud, pointed conversations I was clearly meant to overhear. I can't believe we have to listen to some 25-year-old with a psychology degree tell us how to raise our own children, my dad would grumble from the living room. It's humiliating, my mom would agree, her voice sharp. Being treated like we're incompetent. After everything we do. But they went. Every Tuesday night, they would leave the house with grim, resentful faces and return 2 hours later even more sullen. The classes, meant to help, seemed only to be cementing their belief that they were the victims and I was the villain. CPS had also mandated counseling for me. I was wary at first, but my therapist, a kind, middle-aged man named Dr. Miller, was nothing like I expected. He didn't push or judge. He just listened. He gave me the space to untangle the knot of guilt, anger, and loneliness inside me. You're not responsible for your parents' feelings, Leo, he told me during one session. You're responsible for your own needs. And your need for safety, shelter, and food is not selfish. It's fundamental. It was the first time an adult, other than the DeVisas, had validated my feelings so completely. I started to understand that my desire for a bed wasn't a betrayal, it was a basic human need. Slowly, very slowly, I started to believe it. The midpoint, the first real shift in the frozen landscape of my family, came about a month into the new arrangement. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, almost imperceptible tremor. My dad's parents finally decided to go back home. Their presence had become a constant, low-grade source of tension. My grandmother, in particular, was an expert at pointed sighs and passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty. Their departure left the house feeling cavernous. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it was just the six of us, my parents and their 4 children. The quiet was different now. It was less like the tense silence of a battlefield and more like the awkward silence of strangers in an elevator. That evening, my mom made dinner. It was just a simple roasted chicken with potatoes. But when we sat down at the table, there was a whole chicken on the platter. There was enough for everyone. More than enough. No one had to wait. No one had to rush. I put a piece of chicken on my plate, then a scoop of potatoes. I ate slowly, half expecting it to disappear. But it didn't. After dinner, I was heading up to my room when I heard my mom on the phone in the kitchen. She was talking to her sister. Her voice was low and strained. "I just don't know, Susan," she was saying. "The classes are hard. They talk about parental neglect and emotional needs. I look at what they're describing, and I think, that's not us. We're good people. We help people." There was a long pause. But then I see Leo's face. He's so quiet now. He looks at me like he doesn't even know who I am. Maybe we got so busy helping everyone else, we forgot to look at what was right in front of us. I froze on the stairs, my hand on the banister. It was the first crack in her armor of resentment. The first hint that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see past her own wounded pride. Later that night, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. I opened it to find my youngest sister, Lily, standing there in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Leo," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Are you still mad?" "I'm not mad, Lily Bug," I said, my throat feeling tight. "Is Mom still mad at you?" "I think so. A little bit." She looked down at her rabbit's worn ears. "I don't like it," she said. "I miss when everyone was laughing." She was talking about the chaos, about the noise and the crowds. She didn't understand that the laughter of strangers had been the sound of my erasure. But she was just a kid who missed the way things were. I knelt down in front of her. "It'll get better," I promised, not knowing if it was true. "It's just going to take a little while." She seemed to accept that. She gave me a quick, fierce hug and then scampered back to her room. I closed my door and sat on my bed. The house was quiet. My stomach was full. And for the first time, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in the barren ground of my heart. Maybe we weren't broken beyond repair. Maybe this was just what it felt like to tear something down in order to build it back up again. The fragile truce held for the next few months. The quiet in the house became less of a hostile void and more of a neutral space. My parents continued their mandatory classes, and the bitter complaints about them slowly faded, replaced by a weary resignation. I continued my sessions with Dr. Miller, where I was learning to build a new framework for myself, one where my needs had value and my voice had weight. There were small, tentative gestures of peace. My mom started knocking on my door before entering. My dad, one Saturday morning, wordlessly placed a plate of pancakes he'd made in front of me before I could even get to the kitchen. They were small things, almost insignificant, but in the desolate landscape of our family, they felt like landmarks. My relationship with my siblings began to thaw. Caleb was still wary of me, but the outright hostility was gone. One evening, he came into my room while I was sketching. It was the first time I'd felt like drawing in months. He watched me for a few minutes in silence. That's pretty good, he finally mumbled. Thanks, I said, not looking up. I'm sorry I called you selfish, he said, so quickly I almost missed it. It's just everything got so weird. It's okay, I said, and I meant it. He was just a kid trying to make sense of the emotional shrapnel. I was starting to feel like I could breathe again. The hypervigilance, the constant fear of being displaced, was slowly receding. My room felt more like my own each day. I even pinned a few new drawings to the wall. It seemed, for the first time, that we might actually find a new way to be a family. And then the phone rang. It was a crisis, as it always was. But this time, it was one we couldn't outsource. My grandfather, who had returned home with my grandmother, had a serious fall. He had broken his hip and needed emergency surgery. The news sent a shockwave through our quiet house. My dad was on the phone for hours, his voice tight with worry, coordinating with his siblings. My mom was a blur of nervous energy, packing a small bag for my dad, who would have to drive the 4 hours to the hospital. I watched them, a knot of old dread tightening in my stomach. A crisis was the thing that triggered my parents' deepest instincts, the need to gather people, to create a bustling hub of support, to fill the house with bodies as a buffer against fear. It was their coping mechanism. And it was my nightmare. My fears were realized that evening. I was in my room, trying to read, when I heard my dad's voice from downstairs. He was on the phone, and the tone was one I recognized instantly. It was his savior voice, deep, reassuring, and full of magnanimous offers. Robert, listen, my dad was saying. The surgery is tomorrow morning. I'm heading out there now, but your mom is going to need a lot of help when she gets home. I think it would be best if you and Linda and the kids came back here to stay for a while. It'll be easier for all of us to be together. We can manage this as a family. I felt the floor drop out from under me. No. The word was a silent scream in my head. No, not again. I could feel the walls of my room closing in, the air growing thin. They were falling back into the old pattern, the familiar, destructive dance. All the progress, all the fragile peace we had built, was about to be bulldozed by the first sign of trouble. I put my book down, my hands trembling. I walked to the top of the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. My mom was standing in the hallway, wringing her hands, her face etched with worry. She looked up and saw me. She knew. She saw the look on my face and she knew what I had overheard. My dad ended the call. Okay, he's going to pack up the kids. They can be here in a couple of hours. He turned and saw me standing on the stairs, and his face hardened, a flicker of the old resentment in his eyes. Leo, not now. This is an emergency. Your grandfather. I heard you, I said, my voice dangerously calm. It was a calmness I had learned from Dr. Miller. A calmness that came not from a lack of feeling, but from a certainty of purpose. I walked down the stairs until I was standing on the same level as them. I know it's an emergency, I said, looking from my dad's defiant face to my mom's conflicted one. I know you're scared. But bringing more people here isn't the answer. Leo, for God's sake, this isn't about you and your room right now, my dad snapped, his voice cracking with stress. This is about family. This is about family, I said, and my voice was stronger now, unwavering. This is about our family. The 6 of us. We don't need a house full of people to deal with this. We need each other. I looked directly at my father, and for the first time, I wasn't pleading. I wasn't angry. I was simply stating a fact. A boundary. A line that I would not let them cross again. If they come back, I'm leaving, I said. The words hung in the air, clear and cold. And this time, I won't come back. I'm not going back to the basement. I'm not going back to being invisible. You can have your house full of helpers, or you can have your son. You can't have both. It wasn't a threat. It was a choice. A choice I was giving them. All the therapy sessions, all the lonely nights, all the quiet anger had led to this single, terrifying, clarifying moment. I had found my voice, and I would not let it be silenced again. My dad stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The anger in his face was replaced by shock, and then by something else I couldn't read. Pain. Confusion. He looked at my mom, who was watching me with tears welling in her eyes. But these weren't the tears of anger and shame I had seen before. These were tears of fear. The fear of losing me. The house was completely silent except for the frantic ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a hammer blow. My dad held his phone in his hand, his thumb hovering over his recent calls. Uncle Robert's name was at the top of the list. He looked at the phone, then back at me, standing there, holding my ground, my entire future balanced on his next move. He had to choose. The old way, or a new one. Them, or me. The silence in the hallway stretched for what felt like an eternity. My dad's gaze flickered between my face and the phone in his hand, a silent, agonizing war playing out behind his eyes. My mom stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth, her gaze locked on me. It was as if the entire world had paused, waiting for his decision. The choice was so stark, so absolute. It was the house he had always run, a chaotic haven for everyone but his own son, or a new, uncertain territory where my needs had to be considered. Finally, with a long, shuddering breath that seemed to deflate him, he lowered the phone. He didn't look at me. He looked at my mom, a deep, unspoken sorrow passing between them. He had been so focused on being a good son and a good brother, he was finally seeing that he had been failing as a father. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb moving deliberately. He bypassed Uncle Robert's name. He pressed a different number. Yes, I need to get a price on a home health aid, he said into the phone, his voice strained but clear. For post-operative hip surgery care. My mom let out a small, quiet sob, a sound of pure relief. My own legs felt weak, and I leaned against the wall for support. The tension that had held me rigid for so long began to drain away, leaving me feeling hollow and shaky. He hadn't just chosen me, he had chosen a different way of handling things. He had chosen to solve the problem with a solution, not just with more people. The hours that followed were a blur of quiet, focused activity. The call to Uncle Robert was made, but it was a different call. It was full of apologies and explanations that were vague but firm. It's just not a good time, Rob. The house. It's better if we keep things quiet for now. I'll keep you updated. There was no argument. The crisis with my grandfather was real, and it superseded any hurt feelings. My dad left for the hospital an hour later. Before he walked out the door, he stopped in front of me. He looked exhausted, older than he had that morning. Leo, he said, his voice rough. We'll talk when I get back. It wasn't an apology, not yet. But it was a promise. An acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted between us. I just nodded, and he left. The next few days were strange. My mom, my siblings, and I were alone in the house, a dynamic we hadn't experienced in years. The quiet was thick with unspoken things. My mom was gentle with me, almost fragile, as if she was afraid I might bolt again. She made sure I ate. She'd ask me if I was warm enough at night. Small, maternal gestures that felt both foreign and deeply longed for. When my dad came back a few days later, the news was good. The surgery had been a success, and my grandfather was stable. He brought the weight of the hospital back with him, the smell of antiseptic and the exhaustion of sleepless nights. But he also brought a new stillness. The evening after his return, he knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting at my desk, sketching the gnarled branches of the pine tree outside my window. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Sure." He didn't sit on the bed. He pulled over the small, dusty chair from the corner and sat down, so we were facing each other. He looked around the room, at the bare walls and the single new drawing I'd pinned up. He seemed to be seeing it for the first time. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words sounding clumsy and unfamiliar on his tongue. I've been a fool." He looked at his hands, then back at me. "When my dad was a kid, his family lost everything. They relied on the kindness of relatives, sleeping on floors, taking whatever was offered. He raised me with this deep-seated fear of not being a good provider, of not being helpful. I guess I got so obsessed with proving I could help everyone, I didn't see who I was hurting." He shook his head, a look of genuine regret on his face. "There is no excuse for what I did. For making you feel like a stranger in your own home. For making you sleep in the basement. A father's first job is to make his kids feel safe. And I failed at that. Completely. I am so sorry, Leo." The apology was raw and real. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. I felt the last of the anger inside me dissolve, leaving only a deep, weary sadness for all the time we had lost. "I was just so tired of being invisible," I said, my voice quiet. "I know," he said. "And you weren't. I was just not looking. I was looking everywhere but here." Later that week, my mom and I had our own conversation. We were in the kitchen, washing dishes. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "The parenting classes at first, I thought they were a punishment. But they talked about setting boundaries. About how saying no to some things is how you say yes to your family. I always thought saying no was selfish. I was so afraid of disappointing people." She looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I didn't realize I was disappointing the most important person. You." It was the beginning. Not a magical fix, but a foundation. The conversations were awkward and painful, but they were happening. We were talking to each other, not at each other. We were starting to clear away the wreckage. Slowly, cautiously, I started to inhabit my room again. I unpacked the last of my books. I pinned up more of my sketches. I spent hours at my desk, drawing, letting the quiet of the house seep into my bones. It was a fragile piece, one I was still afraid to trust completely, but it was real. I had fought for my space, and in doing so, I had inadvertently forced my family to make space for each other, too. The house was no longer a public shelter. It was becoming, inch by painful inch, a home. The next few months passed in a rhythm that was entirely new to us. It was a rhythm of quiet normalcy. The house stayed empty of guests. The front door remained closed to long-term visitors. The dining room table, which had once been a chaotic buffet line for a dozen people, became a place where just the 6 of us would gather for dinner. The conversations were sometimes stilted, as we learned to navigate our new dynamic, but they were ours. The biggest change was in my parents. They completed their parenting classes, not as a punishment, but as a lesson they had finally taken to heart. The frantic need to please, the compulsion to fill the house with noise and people, had subsided. It was replaced by a quieter, more intentional focus on us, their children. They learned to listen. They learned to see. My dad helped Caleb with his science fair project, spending hours in the garage with him. My mom started taking Mia and Lily to the library on Saturdays, a special trip just for them. They were small acts of presence, of being there in a way they hadn't been before. They were rebuilding trust, one small, consistent brick at a time. My room became my sanctuary again, but it was different now. It was no longer a fortress to hide in, but a safe harbor I could return to. I filled the walls with my art. The charcoal landscapes grew more expansive, the characters more detailed. The scent of graphite and paper returned. I could close my door and know that my space would be respected. I could breathe. My relationship with Sam and his family remained a vital lifeline. Mrs. Davis would still look at me with a knowing, gentle eye, checking in without being intrusive. "You look good, Leo," she said one afternoon when I stopped by. "You've got your light back." I knew she was right. The constant, low-level anxiety that had hummed beneath my skin for so long had finally gone quiet. I had stopped feeling like a refugee. The final test came on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was in the kitchen, grabbing a snack after school, when I heard my dad on the phone in the living room. My body tensed by instinct, a muscle memory of old fears. I stood still, listening. It was an old friend of his from college. I could only hear my dad's side of the conversation, but the story was a familiar one. The friend was having a hard time, a job loss, a marital dispute, and he needed a place to stay for, just a little while, to get back on his feet. I held my breath. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was it. An old friend. A genuine crisis. It was the perfect storm, the ultimate trigger for my father's old habits. I waited for the inevitable offer, the familiar words, "Of course, come on over. We have the space." My dad was quiet for a long moment. I could picture him in the living room, probably running a hand through his hair, the weight of his old self pulling at him. "John, I am so sorry to hear that," my dad said, and his voice was full of genuine empathy. "That sounds incredibly tough." He paused again, and the silence stretched. "Listen, man, we can't have you stay with us. It's just not possible for our family right now." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But I'm not going to leave you hanging," my dad continued. "Let me make some calls. There's an extended stay hotel not too far from here that's pretty reasonable. Let me see what I can find out. And maybe we can help you with the first week's rent. Let's talk about some resources. We're here for you, just in a different way now." He spent another 10 minutes on the phone, not offering his home, but offering his help. He was a sounding board, a problem solver, a friend. He was being helpful, but the help wasn't costing his family its stability. He was drawing a boundary, not building a wall. When he hung up, he walked into the kitchen. He saw me standing there, an apple in my hand. He knew I had been listening. He didn't look angry or defensive. He just looked at me, a quiet understanding passing between us. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I nodded back. No more words were needed. That evening, I went back to my room and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was no longer a sound of isolation, it was a sound of peace. I sat down at my desk. The rain pattered softly against the window pane. The house was quiet below me, a calm, steady hum of a family finding its way. I picked up a pencil, the wood smooth and familiar in my hand. I looked at the blank sheet of paper in front of me, an empty space full of possibility. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was truly home. I was safe. I had my own space. And in that space, I could finally, truly, begin to heal. I touched the pencil to the paper and started to draw.